Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. Welcome to this devlog, where I'm going to be summarizing the work we did on Listed, which is an app that will allow users to create, share, and watch lists of YouTube channels. We work on this app every single Friday, and today we did a few things. We set up lint-staged in the app. We added some loading states for when authorization and authentication is happening. And we also set up configuration loading. So we have a Zod validator that validates any environment variables that we're bringing in. First up, I merged this pull request from Deepam Sen, who fixed a bug in the database seed code. So before, when we were seeding the database, the common name just got seeded as empty, but we actually wanted to seed it as null. So they fixed this because instead of using nullish coalescing, they just used the OR statement. There's a time and a place for nullish coalescing. In this instance, we actually wanted to do this because the left-hand side was not null or undefined. It was the empty string. So thanks for that fix, because now when you run the seeds, the common name will be null instead of the empty string. And then during the stream, we worked on setting up lint-staged. So lint-staged is a package that makes it so whenever you run your linter or your type checker, it only runs it against the files that have been staged for the commit. And what's nice about this is if you're working on the app, maybe you're working on documentation or something like that, and you haven't touched any TypeScript or Svelte files, you don't want to have to wait for the linter and the type check to run because you haven't changed anything that would cause errors in those things. So lint-stage is really cool because once you set it up, it runs the linter and it runs the type checker only against the files that have changed. So for instance, in our application, let's say that I have a linter error. So I'm just going to remove the semicolon on this line. Now I have a linter error. And if I attempt to commit this, so I'm going to stage it. So now that it's staged, when I try to commit this, it should block the commit because of our commit hooks, but specifically our commit hooks are calling lint-stage. So now when I do this, you can see that we have a matcher, and it essentially only found the files that have changed. So in this case, this was the only file that changed, and it only had to run the linter on that one file. It didn't have to run it across the rest of the code base. And you can see that it errored, and it prevented me from committing, which is great. So to set this up, we installed lint-staged into our project, and then we added a lint-staged RC file to the root, and we added a matcher. So any JavaScript, TypeScript, CJS, Svelte, or TSX files that it comes across will first run through the type checker, and it specifically only passes the files that changed into the type checker. So the type checker doesn't have to run for everything. And then after that, it runs ESLint. So any files that match this, that's what's going to run whenever we do a commit. And it's great because now the linting and the type checking goes a lot quicker. And then the next thing we did was set up auth loading states. So before, whenever you clicked log in, there was like a split second before you got redirected. And also when you click log out, there was a split second before you were actually logged out. Now we added these little loading spinners like that, and we disabled the button so that the user knows something is happening. Same thing on logout. So when you click this button, now it shows a spinner so the user knows that something is actually happening. Those were pretty easy fix. We basically just have a loading variable that we set when the buttons are clicked. And now the user has a better user experience when logging in and logging out. And then the last thing we did was we set up a configuration loader. So in the code base, in the lib directory, we created a file called config.server.ts, and that basically loads in all of our environment variables. Now, SvelteKit actually has a built-in way of creating types for your environment variables. So if you, in SvelteKit, if you import from $env static private, that is actually going to throw a type error if the specific environment variable that you imported doesn't exist. So like if I try to look for banana, we actually get a type error here that says it's not actually exported. And then if you add it to your .env, then it becomes exported. So that is nice, but we also wanted to do further validation than just does it exist. And for that, we brought in Zod. So Zod is a schema validation library, and we basically set up a schema that corresponds to all of our environment variables. So we also have some validation. So the auth secret needs to be a minimum length of 32. All of these other strings can't be empty and have to have a length longer than 1. And then the database port will get coerced. So we pull in from the environment variable, everything is strings, but Zod will take that string and turn it into a number. And if it's not specified, we'll default it to 5432. So we set up this validator, and then we pass all of our environment variables into that validator, and this will throw an error if any of them are missing. So this is nice because if you spin up the app, like let's say you're trying to work on this, you're a new developer, you're trying to work on this locally, you spin up the app. If any of these things are missing from your .env, the app won't even start, and it's going to show you an error to tell you which ones are missing. And this is just a good developer experience. The other thing we did was we now prevent people from importing from here. So basically, if you want to use any of the environment variables, you have to import this config and use it from there. So for instance, in our hooks.server, we're now importing config, and then when we needed them, we're doing config dot. And the idea is, if we ever need to add a new environment variable, we're going to add it to this validator here, and that way we know if we're missing it or not. And we also added a linter rule to prevent people from importing from env static private. So in the linter, we added this rule, no restricted imports, and we passed that in. So that way, if someone's new to the code base and they try to import from here, they're going to get a linter error. And then if they read the contributing guide, it tells them, hey, you should actually be importing from config, not from env static private. So this is just a quality of life thing. Any other developer that works on the app will now have a good idea of what environment variables need to be set up. And then lastly, I merged a PR from Limotes. So they set up an SEO component that sets the title and description of the meta tags of any page that gets rendered. And they did it in two parts. So for one, there's a store. A store is essentially accessible and writable from any component. And this has the title and the description. So if there's some page that needs to change the title or change the description, they can just change the value inside of the store and it will be updated. But those values are brought into the actual SEO component. So the SEO component exports those things as props, which can be set. And then the SEO component specifies all of these things, title, description, and all of these OG and Twitter tags and stuff like that. And so for some components, it makes sense to pull in the store and then just specifically set the items in the store. But for other components, it might make sense to import the SEO component and specify the props. So you have two ways of specifying title or description. You import the SEO component or you import the store. But now title and description can be set from any page. So big thanks to Limotes for making this change, and also big thanks to Oscar for all the feedback whenever they were working on this component. And we also talked about logos. So if you've been following this issue on the Git repo, quite a few people have submitted suggestions for logos for our app. And I thank each and every one of you. There were a ton of really good options, but we spent a little bit of time today kind of like narrowing them down, and we narrowed them down to these two different options. So this one from Mark Boots and this one from Amasil. I'll say I like this one. I like how we have like this italic L. We have talked about potentially we want it to be a little less tilted because it kind of looks like a V right now. So if it's a little less tilted, maybe that'll work. We haven't settled on color either. And then we like this one, but we also potentially don't want the logo to look like this because that kind of looks like an F. It reminds us of like Figma. But if this was oriented to look more like an L, that could potentially work as well. So we narrowed it down to those two. If you want to vote on this, open up this issue on the Git repo, and then just emoji react. If you like this top one, emoji react with tada, and if you like this one, emoji react with the rocket. You can see it's a somewhat close race, but people are preferring this logo a little bit more. So definitely vote if you want to have a say in it. And we haven't decided yet. And also, I'm not just going to go with the one that gets the most votes. I'm going to use your feedback. And also, we'll do some potential iterations on these logos from the people that created them as well. Okay, that's all for this devlog. Thank you for watching. If this was useful or any of my other content was useful, please consider supporting me. If you go to coding.garden/support, it has all the ways that you can support me, and I'd really appreciate it. Definitely tune in every Friday on Twitch, twitch.tv/codinggarden. I'm live right now, and I'll be working on this app, so I'd love to see you in the chat while I'm working on it. I guess that's it for now. See ya.